All right, so this economic crisis should not occur without mentioning one major factor that has caused severe pain for most everyone. That factor, of course, is the Federal Reserve. Now, it's no secret, and it hasn't been a secret for a long time, that a huge number of Americans live paycheck to paycheck with no savings. Now, you can survive like that so long as the paycheck keeps coming in, but if it ever stops, you're screwed. Saving money in the US has been absolutely dismal because the Federal Reserve has kept interest rates near 0% for over a decade at this point. Now, this article you see on your screen right here, this is from 2016, and back then it said, according to a study done by Swiss Re Estimates, that the Federal Reserve's interest rate policy has cost savers in the U.S. $470 billion. And again, this was back in 2016, so you can rest assured that in 2020 now, that number is far higher. I don't know exactly what it would be, but logic dictates that it would be much higher. Who knows what it actually is now, but the low interest rate policy hasn't budged all that much. You could have $50,000 in your savings account, and every month you'll get what, a $10 payment in interest? It's just pathetic. And with inflation on top of it, eroding the dollar's purchasing power, this basically means that you're actually losing money and you're losing purchasing power if you save money. The amount of interest you get, the pitiful amount of interest you would get on your savings, won't keep up with inflation. So if you're responsible, if you're frugal, if you don't live beyond your means, if you don't take on an irresponsible amount of debt, and you just want a nice nest egg accruing some modest interest payment, the Federal Reserve's policy for over 10 years has actively been screwing you. This leads people to either spend that money and consume far more than they otherwise would have if a savings account was actually an attractive place to park your money, or it leads to people putting their money into the stock market as that's the only place to get any sort of return. And then, of course, this bids up stock prices, which is essentially a huge inflated bubble. And as it grows higher, even more people look at it with, sparkles in their eyes, and when that inevitably pops, all that money that you think you've been making for a decade vanishes overnight, as it just did for many, many people. You have got the Federal Reserve to thank for that. So what are we seeing now with this economic crisis? Far too many people have no money. They have no savings. They don't have a rainy day fund. Now, it could be that years and years of Federal Reserve interest rate policy has something to do with this. And as it happens, it's directly correlated to it. If they weren't pushing for the economy to fire on all cylinders for a decade straight, and we had some sobriety in our economy, people would be far more financially stable and responsible. Even low-income people would likely have at least a little bit of a rainy day fund where they're not outright left out to sea. I'm just worried. This economic crisis had better not play itself out without the Federal Reserve being heavily criticized and then ended. They have screwed so much up. They have created the situation where everyone can leverage themselves up with no end in sight, and the act of frugality and saving is actually a bad idea because of them. So whenever we hit any bump in the road, it's almost as if we launched ourselves off of a cliff. The entire banking and finance system needs to be a freely moving, balancing act between savers, investors, consumers, and borrowers. It needs to be a balancing act, but the Federal Reserve puts a 10,000-pound weight on one side of the scale for over a decade, loads the market up on steroids and guides it in the direction of consumption and debt, and then scratches its head in confusion when no one is able to survive and no one has any savings when things get rough. The Federal Reserve has no shortage of economists with PhDs that could probably wipe the floor with me on any high-level test on econometrics, so why was this so difficult for them to see? Why is it that some lowly YouTuber in his tiny corner saw this as clear as day? I think it's because they've educated themselves out of common sense. I'm not sure if there is any other explanation, honestly. They are so convinced that their intelligence has given them some sort of godly insight that they don't know how to be humble and say, you know what, let's take a hands-off approach because we might not be able to price fix money for 325 million people without it blowing up in our face. But anyway, we need to end the Federal Reserve. After this is all over and done with, they have got to go. I know they won't, but a dude can dream. After all, Without the Federal Reserve and perhaps a more sober, naturalized interest rate, people would have at least been a little bit more attracted to putting a little bit more money in their savings account. So when something like this happens, they have a little bit of a cushion. I'm not saying that everyone is going to be able to retire at the age of 50 because they have so much saved that they never have to work again. I'm not saying that. But when we hit a bump in the road, not everyone is screwed. And the reason why everyone's screwed right now is directly tied to the decade-long Fed policy of almost 0% interest rates. So like I said, when all is said and done, they cannot escape criticism, and everyone needs to work to make sure they get criticized to no end. But anyway, that's it for now. Please like, subscribe, and share this video with people who think that capitalism is somehow at fault about all this, which is just hilarious to me. But anyway, yeah, that's it. Please take it easy.